Okay, so now to the boring section of the program, but hopefully this will be helpful. So the rest of the afternoon, we've got about an hour and 15 minutes left. I'm going to go through sort of 3 different sets of discussions around teams. So the first one is really just kind of around what teams are, how we can think about them, some conceptual frameworks that might help you when you're thinking about your role in a team or as a leader or as a member, and then the stages of teams that happen, because clearly teams have to be developed, and then they get to be working better, and then they have a higher performing outlets. So we can talk about that. But just to start, why do we need teams? Why do we work in teams? We can't do everything ourselves, although we sometimes think we can, right? Okay. What else?
You have a bunch of people working together, you have synergistic effects.
Mm-hmm. So, what's that?
That's synergy.
Okay. Okay, not all on you. Why else? More fun. Okay. If you're an extrovert, what what else?
Then there's a sense of outsiders that you can make fun of.
Oh, okay, that's good. That is not one I normally hear. Outsiders to tease. Okay. Would the alternative of that be to have a sense of belonging?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, okay. What else? Well, whether you're in the team or the other team. Right. Well, okay, so there are lots of reasons that we have teams. Obviously, there are various perspectives to cope with complex and changing environment. All of us don't know everything. We have different personality styles, we have different skill sets, we have different training, we have different cultures, genders, all those different things come together to bring a set of diverse perspectives. And when you bring that together in a team, usually the team is more than the sum of its individual parts. However, we know there's the downside to that, and that there's lots of other things happen when you bring lots of diverse perspectives together that are challenging and can create conflict. These days, you need more diverse political coalitions for success. So you think about an environment like UCSF, it's a very political environment. Who you know and how you know, and getting space and getting funding and getting on a team and getting an RA that's good versus bad, and those things, those are as much political as they are empirical or intellectually driven, or more than. And so really being able to have teams and be able to meet people and develop those diverse coalitions can be really important in getting your work done. Obviously needing different skills to meet this environment, and this disciplinary thing. So I mean, probably, I'm not sure what the disciplines are from the group in your group, but I'm guessing you probably have a range of different disciplines that you're bringing to your study. I'm a sociologist and I work in the School of Dentistry, so that's weird. So they don't know what to do with me. But then when they hear about my work, they're like, wow, this is really interesting stuff. So some of them say that, some of them could really care less. But I think, you know, it's bringing those disciplines together actually creates opportunities. It creates opportunities intellectually. It creates opportunities for our work. And obviously brings creativity. As we can see around the room, the teams bring great creativity. So let's talk about what is an anatomy of effective team. So most teams have a leader. The leader usually has good people skills and is committed to a team approach. If they're a good leader, can create a relaxed climate for communication and is focused on clarifying the role of the team members. What else do you think a team leader should be doing? So just some to start. Okay, so resource allocation and resource acquisition. Mm-hmm. What's that? Picking up the slack. Is that the leader's job? Okay, let's talk about that later. So the leader has accountability, is what you're saying. Accountability for the end of whether they pick up the slack or motivate other people to do it. But right, they're the ones. What else? Over here? Mm-hmm. That's a really important one. The leader really being able to bring the group together and say, why is it that we're here? I mean, we heard at this table, sorry to pick on you, we didn't have a clear leader, and we weren't really clear what the goal was. But that's just normal. If you have kind of a group of people who don't really know why they're there, what they're doing, and no one's motivated them to do that, you're not going to get amazing, not saying it's not amazing performance, but you're not going to get the most amazing performance because you need to have somebody really setting that tone and providing that direction. Anything else? In the back. Fostering collaboration. So understanding the team, understanding the dynamics in the team, the personalities, the skill sets, and being able to kind of foster and bring those together to bring out the best in them. Yeah. Oh, sorry. In the back here. Mm-hmm. Right, to empower the different group members to take on leadership roles at different times during the team. That's great. And Satish? Mm-hmm. Right, right. Yeah, and the conflicts may be with the leader sometimes as well, but managing those team as well with the leader. So yeah, so having a good team leader is very important. And would you have another one?
Depending on the size of the group, does it have to be like a group, like one person, or could it be a small group of people of a large number what leadership team do you think about?
Right, no, I think that's a great point. It sort of depends on the nature of the team, I think. If it's a project-based team versus operational team, I mean, there's different types of teams that come together. I think there's some places where it's really important to have a clear leadership and a leadership structure, and others where you may share that or rotate that in some ways. I think we saw that in the activities where people might have taken a leadership in the creative side and other people to create a leadership in the structural side or something like that. So where you can definitely do that. So I don't think there's a cut and dry answer to that, but I think it's a good point, something to keep at. So thinking about team members, so individual team members, when you have an effective team, they're willing to contribute, they're prepared to take risks, they're clear about their role on the team, and they know they can influence the agenda. Is there anything else you can think of that would make a good team member? What are some of the things that you observed in your activities? Being responsible, not shirking, not putting off on other people.
Just a question, knowing that you can influence the agenda, do you think that's really a generalizable theme of teams? Like, do you think there's types of teams where it's not really important that the team member knows that they can influence the agenda?
That's not really what the science would say. I mean, it depends on what you consider it, whether you're considering a team, an actual group of people who are collaboratively working together versus a team that's a hierarchical team. Because you could have a hierarchical team where you're just telling people what to do and they're less empowered. You're actually going to probably get less performance out of people if they feel like they have no control over the agenda, even if that's in a small way.
Look, to give you an example, let's say you're working in a rivet factory or a sneaker factory or something, right? I mean, like, does every sneaker manufacturer need to feel like they can affect the model of the sneaker? You know what I mean? Like the design of sneakers?
It doesn't have to be at that high of a level. I mean, it could be within the scope of what their responsibility is in their work, but that they should be able to have an input and have a say. Yeah.
Yeah, I guess building on that, the team members also have to be willing to be vocal in a constructive way and say, I need some additional direction. Can you help me?
Right. Right. So it's a combination of being able to speak out and influence the agenda with a positive spin on that, as opposed to just a constant complainer, which those are the team members you just don't want to be around. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So then the team itself, so when you have a high-performing team, it demonstrates a high level of interdependence among members. They have mutual trust. They're clear about their goals and established targets. They have the capacity to create new ideas, and they're able to examine errors without personal attacks. Think of anything else that would make that you would use to identify a high-performing team? Oh, some redundancy. So it's not so specific that if you lose one team member, you completely can't function anymore. Okay, that's a great point. Yeah? Yeah, I think that's really important, and I'm going to talk a little bit later about developing team members, and we can come back to that because I think there are different stages at which people can take on new roles and are able, to. Sometimes new roles are things you do well already. You just haven't been asked to do them. Sometimes new roles require training, mentoring, other things that take a lot of time. So that flexibility, particularly if you're the team leader, you need to be able to understand where your different team members are, and if you're asking people to take on new roles, what that's actually going to entail, because it can actually derail a team if you're asking one person to do something that they're not really prepared to do, because it could create a lot of conflict around that. So, so it's about giving the support as well as that. Okay, so here's some team basics. Really important to have a clear mission with meaningful purpose. How many people have gone to a meeting and you don't know why you're there? Right. We've all been to those meetings. So for the team to be really cohesive and be working together, they need to know why they're together. To have the clear goals and vision, small enough in number. I know Mike talked earlier about 40. I think 40 is too big for a team. That's like a whole company or something. But to have a small enough working group that you can actually get the task done. We talked about complementary skills, a clear working approach. So this is a process issue in that how you are agreeing, the whole team has agreed upon how they're going to get that work done and what that process is going to look like. So that's really important. That it's rooted in the culture of the organization or the department that you're in. That you have a sense of mutual accountability that came up, that people are going to do what they said they're going to do. That they know what the rewards for good teamwork are. So not just why are we doing this, but how are we going to celebrate? How are we, what are the things that we're going to get if we accomplish our goals? And good communication patterns. Any of you read the article that I sent out about the high-performing, the new teams? Yeah, Jonathan read it. It was interesting. I mean, I don't know that you could really put those little sensors on everybody and really figure that out in a normal environment. But I think that being able to look at the communication patterns and notice if the team members are communicating well or if there seems to be a lot of avoidance going on in terms of that is also really important to look at. So this is a big thing. It's sort of what we call the life cycle of groups. And how many of you have heard of forming, storming, norming, and performing? How many of you have heard those concepts before? So these are kind of like the 4 stages of a team. So the first stage is when you're forming, you're trying to get together, figure out what your purpose is. The next one is storming. So this is when I said go. Like you're out of the gate now, and you're doing your thing, but it's a little chaotic. The next one is norming. It's like, all right, we got this down. We're sort of figuring it out. We're getting over the chaos. Now we're getting a little bit more into the normal functioning of how we're going to work together. And then finally, you get to performing. And in the middle is the sort of sweet spot. You want to get to the group synergy. So across these 4 things, and I have some more slides on them. I'll go through relatively quickly because they're in your packages. But there's interpersonal issues that you can expect at each stage. There's group behavioral patterns you can expect at each stage. There's task patterns that you can expect at each stage, and then there's leadership issues at each stage. So for example, when you're in your forming stage, you're just put a new team together, you've got a new task, you've got a new grant, you've got a new whatever it is that you're working on. A lot of the interpersonal issues that are going to come up are around inclusion. So who's in, who's out, who's in the, what did you say, like, who are we going to make fun of that didn't get to be on the team, and who's in, but also what those roles are. And people want to feel like, they understand what their role is and that they're included in that. The behavioral patterns that come with that are sort of move to similarities, anger, and frustration, superficial, polite, ambiguity, and confusion. So, sometimes people are confused. There's a lot of superficial, this is great, we're starting, et cetera. But there's no usual, intense conflict right off the bat because people are just trying to figure out what's really going on at that point. So you may have things happening a little bit more behind the scenes than in the group itself. Like, oh, I just got put on this new task with, these 3 people, and I've never worked with them before, but you're complaining to, your best friend, not to the group itself or what have you. The task issues is really people usually are trying to define what their roles are, figure out who the other people are, who has similar interests, who has different interests, and kind of orient yourself to the work you're going to do. And from a leader's perspective, this is when the team is the most dependent on you because you are needing to set that vision, you're needing to set the goals, really define the roles for the team and set that team up for success. So in that initial formation stage is when the leadership role is going to be one of the most important in terms of really being actively engaged with all of the work of the team. So then if you move down to the storming, then the interpersonal issues become more about control. So who gets to do what, who's in control of this, who's in control of that piece, some around accountability and other things. This is when you're sort of establishing your rules. There may be some attacks on leadership. There may be some, questioning of are the right people here, are they not here, those types of things in terms of the behavioral pattern. And then in terms of the task, usually people are really focused on decision-making processes and establishing power and influence. So you're out of the gate, and you're kind of trying to figure out who's doing what, how are we getting it done, and that's usually when you see a lot more of the jockeying for power, for influence, et cetera, within a team. For the leadership, this is when you sort of move from total dependence into counter-dependence, because now people are really doing part of the work, so you need them to keep doing that work. So you're depending on them as much as they're depending on you, and you're trying to kind of create that cohabitation between the leadership and the team. And then as you move down into norming and performing, that's when you see the team kind of really getting more cohesion. And so you're moving more into the interpersonal issues that you find more affection on the team. People are more, they've worked out kind of some of their power struggles or just gotten over it or whatever it is that they need to do, and can really come together, be more cohesive, have more of a negotiation perspective than a conflict perspective, and really learn to grow and work as a team. So this is where you get more functional relationships and more productivity out of your team, and then that's when you really get true interdependence between the leadership. So as a leader, when you have a really high-performing team, you may not need to do as much hands-on touch things, but it becomes more interdependent in terms of they're going to need to know when the team needs to go to the next step, take the next turn, et cetera. But you don't need to get into necessarily all the process and the detail type of issues. So this is kind of what we think of, when we talk about the life cycle of a team. This is the general framework for thinking about that. Have any of you experienced this or are experiencing this? What does it feel like when you're in the forming stage? Right. Right.
You're just sort of like, in my experience, you're just sort of doing things up, and then sort of trying to decide at the same time something you want to be a part of,
Mm-hmm.
or how invested you want to be.
Right. 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 Has anybody been on a really high-performing team? Yeah? What did that feel like when you were on that high-performing team? Sort of easier, it's exciting, you feel like it's a little more seamless, you're not stressing out or fighting as much, feeling that anxiety. But I think it's important to know that in that middle period, that's really normal, that when if you formed a team and you're sort of still trying to figure out what it is you're doing and how you're working together and you're having some of that conflict and anxiety, that's actually really normal, and that's part of the process. Most teams don't form and go straight to performing, because the thing that's critical between forming and performing is time together. It's time together, it's conflict, it's sorting out that conflict, it's figuring out your processes and all those things, which can be uncomfortable for many people, who want things to just kind of be smooth all the time. But it's actually a really important part of building a team and having a team. Conflict can be very positive in that manner, because you're trying to get your team to that performing arena by resolving those issues as they come up and really clarifying. Does that make sense? Jonathan?
Team member, I guess going back to those criteria, you also have to be willing to have those crucial conversations with people so that if something's not working, you're willing to say it.
That's exactly, yeah, absolutely. And as a team leader, that's really, really important. So, and I'm going to talk a little bit about feedback and giving feedback in a minute. So I'm not going to go through all of these, but it's a little bit of what I've talked about. The forming piece, you know, there's not usually a lot of open conflict, but people sometimes are surprised or frustrated. This is a time when people have a lot of anxiety about their roles and what's going on. The storming is really the attempts at establishing or clarifying goals. This is when you get the competition for leadership, competition for, you know, control and the various things. People can get frustrated, angered, disillusioned, have anxiety, or just be bored if they're really not engaged in the process. The norming is when you start to sort of get over that curve and you start to really feel a little bit more like you have the tools within the team to resolve the conflict, to deal with those issues. Less competition, more collaboration, more affection, more humor around the work that you're doing. And then finally, the performing. Low avoidance of conflict, so when conflict comes up, people feel like they really have the capacity to say, hey, what's going on? Or people are, you know, something didn't get done, and looking at the team and saying, how do we as a team let this happen, as opposed to the interpersonal competition. And this is when you really get people really satisfied with the teams that they're on. So one of the other things about joining a team is that there's risk in joining a team. So the conversation earlier was sort of, you know, between the academic environment and the corporate environment, but in either one of these, you're going to be on a team. And in some places, there's more rewards for that teamwork. In some places, that there's less. But there's certainly some things that people worry about. One is, you know, if you join a team, your performance is now going to be reflected as that team's performance, as opposed to just your own individual. And that can be really scary for people, particularly those of us in academia who are a little bit more focused on our own career, our own research, our own outputs. And so that can be risky. Giving up individual control. Now, some people, there's two sides to that, right? Some people are worried, they want to control everything, they don't want other people to do it. Other people are happy to let someone else do it, and they can sort of skate on by. So you kind of have to balance those two things. Sometimes when we're on teams, we realize that we have to change. We realize that we have to improve, or that we don't have good conflict skills, we don't have a certain skill that we need. And that can be risky as well, because you're putting yourself in a vulnerable position where you need to understand, where a good team leader will help facilitate that, but where you may need to learn new skills or develop yourself, and that can have some impact on our egos or self-esteem. Allowing others to lead. I find that sometimes really senior PIs sort of vacillate between this. You really want to empower the folks around you to do as much as possible, otherwise your lab or your group or your research team isn't as productive as possible. But then you also that's risky as well, letting other people take on that type of responsibility, particularly when your name is on the bottom line of various things. So there could be risk there. And most of us really understand hierarchy. We get it, you know, we've grown up with hierarchy. There's the top and then the middle and then the bottom, and you usually know where you are, whether it's a social hierarchy or an institutional hierarchy. And there's something familiar about that that allows you to understand where you take control. And teams often cut across those hierarchies, and they make people uncomfortable, so it's taking a risk on that. Are there other ways that you can think of that being part of teams sort of makes you feel uncomfortable, or think of other risks? Do any of these resonate with anyone? How many of you have been on a team that feels really stuck? Have you been on a stuck team? What was the feeling? What was the stuck?
The stuck was continuing to do the same set of processes over and over and over again, and the leader not stepping in to make the decision to how to move forward.
So the processes weren't working, or they weren't getting you where you needed to go, but you were kind of stuck in that routine.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. How did the leader ultimately get around that? Or is it still stuck? It's still stuck. Okay. Yeah. Anyone else have any experiences of feeling on a team that you're stuck? Uh-huh. Where you're being asked for your opinion, but then you're not really being listened to, or you're. Mm-hmm. Right, right, right. Yeah, that's a hard one when the problem comes from the top, unless you can change that leadership at the top, which can be tricky, obviously, if the leader is the one sort of pushing that down. Some of the things that you can do to get a team unstuck are to just go back to team basics, really sort of like, are we meeting? Is the process there? Do we have a clear mechanism for solving conflict? Some of the things I talked about earlier. Sometimes small wins, like just really overemphasizing something, an achievement that you had to kind of get people's motivation back and get them, okay, that's right, that's why I'm here, back moving forward can help. Injecting new information or new approaches. I've been on teams where we've just been kind of not knowing how to move forward and looking outside and saying, someone come in and present, or do a facilitated exercise with us to help us kind of break out of whatever it is that we're feeling so stuck on. You can change the team membership, and you can change the team leader. So depending on where you sit in the team, there's certainly the possibility to say, this person's leadership isn't working anymore, or we're feeling stuck. Maybe we'll rotate leadership or something like that, so that you can try to infuse some new energy into it. And then examine communication patterns for informal engagement. This came out of the paper that I sent around, but that paper really showed that when team members communicated socially and had other avenues for communication that weren't just around the specific teamwork, that those teams tended to perform higher. So having some of that comfort, social engagement, other things actually really helps as well. So how many of you have had conflict on a team? No one? No one in this room has ever had conflict on a team? So some of the things that cause conflict are power differences, time pressures, all these things we know, competition, value differences. How many people have felt conflict because you thought a conflict was coming, and so you anticipated that conflict, which created the conflict? Right? I know you've all felt this. It's going to be so uncomfortable, so that you're just already having a conflict in your mind. You've invented the conflict before the conflict even happened, right? So because we know our team members, we know our boss, we know our friends, we know our spouses, right? So we just know that's gonna happen. So that's a big one. And then all the other things, the ambiguity and cultural differences that happen. So the good thing about conflict is that it's really normal. Conflict is actually normal and can be very productive if dealt with positively. And there's lots of tools and seminars you can go to around conflict management. But from a team perspective, particularly from a leader of a team perspective, it's important to understand the causes of conflict, watch for the signs of conflict, know how to avoid unnecessary conflict through managing your team well, and know how to resolve conflict, because it is inevitable. So this makes it sound really, really easy, and this is not a conflict management course, so I'm not going to go into all of this, but needless to say, if you're going to manage a team and you're going to have these things, really, this is really, really important, because as a leader, one of the things you're going to be asked to do most often is to step in when there is conflict and deal with the issues that have come up. Conflict can be destructive on the team when it diverts attention from the importance of the work the team's doing, when it undermines morale, when it polarizes people, increases differences, or leads to harmful behavior such as fighting and name-calling, which sounds like that only happens on the East Coast. But conflict can be constructive, though, when the conflict results in clarification of important issues and problems. So when you have a team and two people are disagreeing about something, it may be a sign that the team doesn't have a good sense of direction or doesn't have a good sense of what the task is that they're supposed to be doing. Two people see it really different. Having that conflict, having that discussion, having that be facilitated well can actually lead to a really positive outcome, which is everyone on the team knowing much more clearly what the values, the goals, what the are of the work that you're doing. It can be positive when it engages people versus obviously undermining them, getting people engaged in that work or the clarification that needs to happen. Improving communication and also sometimes just having conflict releases emotion and anxiety that you've had. So if anyone ever had that experience, when you finally have the fight, you kind of feel better. No one's ever had that experience? Okay, so the other thing to just in terms of wrapping up here in terms of team basics is that teams end, right? They don't go on forever and ever. Some teams do, I suppose, but most don't. And the endings can be various, have various effects. But one of the things that we always say is that, you know, if you have a team and it's coming to an end, it's always really good to have some sort of a marking of that, a celebration, you know, work well done, so that people feel like they've accomplished something, and it's not, when it just sort of fizzles. Have you ever been somewhere where you were part of something really big, and then it kind of fizzled out, and you kind of felt left empty, right? It's not a great feeling, and it doesn't motivate you for the next team. So really being able to mark those successes, mark those achievements, and move forward is good. So I'm just going to skip this one. So we're going to transition into some activities around your actual building of a team. So people tell me, what kind of teams are you on? Are you the director of the team? Are you part of a team? Are they, what kind of, like, what are the team experiences you're having right now? So sort of functional teams in terms of the work being done. How many of you lead a team? So who's on the teams that you lead? Are these mostly like research staff, administrative staff, other scientists, postdocs, grad students, project managers? Okay. How many of you have teams that include administrative staff as well? Okay. Okay. So as I talked about, the issue of time and learning together is really the thing that gets you to that higher performing team, along with all of the sort of hygiene that you need to do as well. But it really does take time and working together to get to the place of more high performance. If you are trying to build team performance, I think this came out a little bit today, establishing urgency and direction. So, I mean, when we did this exercise, everybody was pretty laissez-faire until I said you've got 5 more minutes, right? So making people feel like they need to show up, need to continue to do work, need to be engaged. Selecting people based on their skill and their skill potential is really important. I think we heard a little bit about that earlier. Is that easy to do? Yeah. Yeah, it really does.
It also requires you to have a very good sense of exactly what competencies you need to actually accomplish something. If you're taking on new work or a new project, it still might be, you may think you have a good sense of exactly what you need on your team in terms of skills and personalities, but you may find out through the process that you need other things like gaps.
Yeah, no, that's so true. That's so true. And I think the other thing, and we'll talk a little bit about this in a minute, is the being able to course correct and not say, well, I made a hire, and so I'm just sticking with it to the very brutal, bloody, deadly end. You know, like to being able to say, we know you know when something didn't work out right, and being able to figure out how to change that, whether that's in your own team or as part of somebody else's. Really paying attention to the first meetings and actions. Like I said at the beginning, that's when your team is most dependent on you as a leader, is when you're really setting the tone, you're setting the urgency, you're setting the goals, and helping the team decide how they're going to work together. Set goals and hold people accountable to those goals. Challenge people, and spend lots of time together and provide feedback. So the horse is saying, no one is making you do anything you don't want. I'm just saying we're all headed for Dodge City, and we think you should come along. So how many people have really feel like they could really motivate their staff, motivate their team? They're really good at that. Why not? It sure does. So what do you think motivates people? Okay. Mm-hmm. Feeling like you're contributing to something that is meaningful. Yeah. Recognition, ownership. Mm-hmm. What motivates you? Anything else?
I think it's important. What's not been said is kind of financial incentives in general. Like the literature shows that that's actually much lower down than all the other factors.
Absolutely right. So most people want to be successful. Systems can engage this natural motivation or they can extinguish it. So we just talked a little bit about what motivates you. This research came out of, this is from Hertzberg, I think this was in Harvard Business Review, but they looked at motivation and they looked at factors along two axes. So this one are factors that lead to extreme dissatisfaction and then factors that lead to extreme satisfaction. So here, these are things that we would call institutional hygiene. So if they're not in place, things can go bad very, very quickly. But if they are in place, it doesn't lead to extensive satisfaction. It mostly leads to dissatisfaction. So those things are mostly company policy related. So your supervision, your relationship with your supervision, your working conditions, your salary, your relationship with your peers. So these things really matter, but they matter if they're bad. So if you have a really great relationship with your supervisor, that's not going to make you extremely happy. But if you have a really bad relationship with your supervisor, that's going to make you extremely unhappy. Does that make sense? So on the alternate side, the things that actually lead to extreme satisfaction are recognition, the work itself, the level of responsibility, and the advancement and growth. So you can kind of think about these things in terms of the necessary but not sufficient, and then the necessary to move beyond that. Does that make sense? Can you think of anything else that you would, are you surprised that you don't see this on the list? Well, they've got salary down here. Yeah. Right. Yeah. Yeah. Well, I mean, so there's a little bit of a blue line over here. I mean, it motivates a little bit, but it's more going to create dissatisfaction if people feel like they are, being unfairly penalized or they're being paid less than their peers or something like that. It's going to make them unhappy more than getting a raise would make them happy. So, I don't know how long you've all been at UCSF, but raises don't come very often. So, what does the university do? The university does all sorts of other things for staff motivation, staff satisfaction, the various, days they have and other things that they do. And it's because they can't do the salary thing, or they won't. We could argue about that, but so there are other ways to engage your staff and make that working environment positive without necessarily doing the raise. So some of the keys to motivation are competence, making sure people have skills to do the task successfully. So you can motivate somebody who's incompetent, and that's really not going to get you where you need to go. Having some meaningfulness to the work, and I think this came up in several of the comments, really having comprehension and value for the work that's done. Even if their part of the work is very small, understanding you as a leader, connecting the piece that they're doing as so critical and important to that overall can really help motivate people. Giving people choice, having some sense of control over their environment and control over what they're doing, even if it's relatively limited. I mean, we can't give everyone control over everything that they do. We hire people to do certain types of jobs in certain types of situations, but really allowing them to have input is very motivating. And giving people progress on their work. So have any of you ever had a supervisor that never gave you any progress? You didn't have any idea if you were doing a good job or a bad job, or when you were doing your dissertation, you're just writing away and you're just wondering, is this even gonna fly? Right? So you need that feedback. So it's motivating to get that feedback. It's motivating to know, even if the feedback is, this isn't really good, you're gonna have to fix this, that's actually kind of motivating too, isn't it? Oh, whoops, all right, I'm gonna go back and redo that analysis or whatever it is. So that's good as well. So I'm gonna do a couple slides about feedback, and then we're gonna do an exercise. I promise I'll stop talking soon. How many people like giving feedback? Okay, why? Yeah.
Because I feel like it helps reset and make sure that you're moving in parallel together. And I always find it's more helpful to do it earlier with your people than it is to do it later.
Right.
So
Yeah.
more useful in every way. And the only reason not to do it is because maybe not want to.
Mm-hmm. How do you get over that sort of feeling of, oh gosh, I have to give this person feedback and it's uncomfortable? How do you motivate yourself to do that?
I try to schedule it so that it's going to happen regardless of if there's a problem, so that it's already sort of institutionalized in the relationship that I have.
Right.
Somebody that I'm supervising closely.
That's great. That's really good. Yeah, feedback is so important. It's important that it's often. It's important when there are instances that come up, things are positive or negative. It's important that it's directed at changing behavior, not at insulting people or all those good things about talking about the behavior that's changeable. And check to ensure it's understood. So making sure that once you give feedback that you're working to have the person then, it's not that you can force someone to do active listening, but that you're getting the feedback then back from them, that they really understood what you said. Because otherwise you can get just a lot of head nodding and then not really a lot of comprehension on that. How many people like getting feedback? You like getting positive feedback. Yeah. That's the best kind, isn't it? Everyone would just do that. Particularly as a team leader, if you're building your team, you're going to be giving a lot of feedback, but if you can create an environment where you're receiving feedback as well, that's part of actually the empowering the folks to feel like they are really contributing. And you'll get a lot of interesting information. And one of the key things we always tell leaders is, you don't have to accept all the feedback, but you have to accept it, but you don't have to change based on every single thing that somebody tells you. So it's your job as the team leader or the director to say, okay, what is the useful feedback that I'm going to actually incorporate, and what are the things that I could say, I can understand that you're unhappy with that, but that's not going to necessarily change for whatever reasons it might be. And then just to evaluate the consequences of that. So thinking then moving to the teams themselves. So you've got a team, you've got your lab, you've got your research program, you've got some people you're working with, you might have some administrative people, some lab folks, some peers even. You've got kind of two types of behavior that you're going to be working on. One is directed behavior, which involves clearly telling people what to do and how to do it. It sort of relates to the task function. So imagine you've hired a new person in your mouse lab, and you need to teach them how to breed mice. So it's a task. You are going to show them, here's how you do this, or I'm assuming you do that, or maybe not. But anyway, I was at a dental conference yesterday where they were talking about mouse breeding. So an embryo, I don't know, it sounded very brutal. But I'm a sociologist, we don't do that kind of stuff. And then there's the supportive behavior, which involves listening to people, providing support, encouragement for their efforts, facilitating. So that's the more mentoring side, right? So the really support and encouragement. So there's like, here's how you do the job, and then there's the, yay, I'm so glad you're doing the job, and this has really helped. So just keep that in mind. So the Blanchett leadership model, this really looks at task-focused behavior, which is that how we teach people to do the actual tasks that need to be done. And this is relationship-focused behavior, that supportive behavior, which is our support, our mentorship, our emotional support that goes along with that behavior. So if you start in the left side over there, you're really just directing somebody. So you're telling somebody what to do, but you're not really putting much emotional energy into them doing that behavior. So then you would move up to coaching behavior, which is you're still telling them what to do, but you're giving them a little bit more support in that. Then you can move over to empower, which is now they know how to do the job pretty well, so you can kind of cheer them on still and give them the support they need so that they can really feel confident in the skills that they're doing. But you don't need to spend so much time micromanaging them or sort of really looking at the task specifically. And then you can move down into delegate, which is really, you don't need to spend a lot of emotional energy on them, and you don't need to supervise their tasks. You've really, you can really just delegate the task to them. And this is generally the way that we look at in terms of developing our team members as a cycle. So you're always going to start and direct, move up around, and then come down to delegate. So the reason for this is in the first one, when you're structuring and delegating, why would you start in this box? Right, so whether it's an experienced person on a team doing a task they have never done before, or a new lab assistant trying to figure out how to use the machines, right? You have to literally just teach them what to do. So why would you not invest a lot of emotional energy in that person right off the bat? If they can't do it, you have to get rid of them. And is it easier to get rid of somebody? Is it easier to find a new team member with somebody that you've spent a lot of emotional energy getting to know, or not? Right. It makes it a lot harder for you to go back and make a difficult call about somebody's competence if you've then put a lot of emotional energy into getting to know them. Now, a lot of people, the first thing they do is they will hire somebody and they want to become really good friends with them. You know, they want to sort of establish that rapport and really become good friends with them. But that can actually not work very well if you have a basic competence problem. If the person who's been hired for the job literally cannot do the job or is not going to be competent. And there's a reason UCSF has a 6-month probationary period. And it's not to be mean to people, it's to make sure that you're getting the right fit for the job that you have. So then in the coaching box, this is where the leader continues to direct, but also explains decisions, solicits suggestions, and supports progress. So what's positive and what's negative about about having somebody that you're coaching? It's actually the most work. If you have somebody in this coaching box, that person is taking up more of your time than somebody in any of the other boxes, right? Because you're putting a lot of task-directed behavior and you're using a lot of supportive directed behavior. So if you have, but then for the employee, for the person who's getting coached, how does it feel to be in that box? Feels great. Oh my gosh, you could just hang out here all day, right? You're getting told how to do your job, you're getting lots of support on all the things, but you're getting all this emotional support as well, and it's just really great. But for the person who's doing the coaching, this is the part of the development cycle that's going to take the most time, the most energy. So if you're thinking about a team that you have that's developing and you have people in different boxes, you want to kind of look and see, do you have too many people in this coaching box? You have too many people that you're not pushing on to delegating, because that's going to take up a lot of your personal time and your energy in terms of getting your team to a higher performance. Then you move over to supporting and empowering, which is where the leader facilitates and supports people's efforts and shares responsibility, but really starting to push more of the decision-making responsibility onto that. So what are the pros and cons of this box? Yeah, that happens sometimes. Yeah, you put a lot into somebody and then they leave.
I would agree. As in often, I mean, that's a point oftentimes where, frankly, where RAs move on to another step in their career. Just right there,
Right.
when you start just being incredibly effective, that's the time they go to medical school.
Yeah. And what can we do about that? There's nothing we can do about that. We can wish them very well is what we can do. That's right. Unfortunately, that's true. Right. That's called falsely imprisoning, actually. Yeah. Yeah.
I think one of the other issues with this box is you have to be able to let go as the director or leader of the
Right.
and be confident with the person that you can just move to supporting or coaching.
Right.
And sometimes you may not.
Yeah, because when in coaching, you're still really paying attention to the content of their work, and in empowering, you're still sort of, you're giving them the behavioral support, but you're not really micromanaging them anymore. So depending on what your management style is, some people have a really hard time letting that go, letting the task, checking the tasks and things like that go. But that's actually really freeing for you as the manager because you now don't have to do that work anymore, but you have to feel confident in that. And then finally, we move into delegating, which is when you really are turning over the responsibility for decision-making and problem-solving to people. So this is like the sweet spot. This is really where you want your folks because you trust them, you have a good relationship with them, you know they can do the work, you know that they'll take the responsibility, and it's the least amount of effort on your part. So what do you think some of the mistakes are that people make when moving through this cycle? I'll go back here. Uh-huh.
It's really helpful to hear this actually, just because if you're starting a team and you're bringing a lot of new people, and suddenly you're in the coaching phase, which requires a huge amount of your time, you don't build in adequate time to be able to provide that level of support when you run into issues.
Right.
So it's just helpful to me, just in terms of your, I like what you said, in terms of your time commitment in that box, the life cycle of the team, you just have to make sure that you
Right.
devote sufficient amount of time.
So what would happen if you went directly from direct to delegate? What would be the downside of doing that? Right. So here, what you haven't done is you haven't invested in the relationship. And so if there's a problem, it will be much harder then to go back and address that problem because you don't have that basis of the relationship that you've built doing the coaching and the empowering. That's absolutely right. There was another one. Just the downside of keeping, I think I said this before, but the downside of keeping people in that. So as your employees or your other folks, they really like being in those two coach and empower boxes, don't they? Because they're getting a lot of your attention. They're getting a lot of support and feedback. So one of the other things people don't do is they don't truly delegate. They sort of empower, but they don't truly delegate the work to folks and deal with the ramifications of that. Because sometimes the employees can feel, oh, well, I used to get all this high touch, and now nobody is returning my phone calls anymore. Or I'm not getting that feedback. And so it's important when you're going from that empower to delegate that the person's really ready for it and that you're really transparent with them, that this is really now your responsibility and I really trust you, but setting up some feedback mechanisms to check in. Now, what happens if you take somebody who you've delegated to on one thing and you give them a new task and you just delegate the new task to them? What's the downside of that? They might not know how to do it, right? So this isn't a one-time cycle. This is kind of a constant cycle depending on what people's roles are in the teams, where people are in your, within the group, and the things that you're asking them to do. So if you have a research assistant who's doing quantitative research and all of a sudden you put them on a qualitative project and they don't know what they're doing, you're going to actually have to go through this whole cycle to really work with them on that. So think of one of your team members and write down a key task the person is working on. Consider the person's skills, motivation, and dependability, and think about which style you think that person needs right now, and is that style matching with what you're actually giving that person right now? Just take a couple minutes to think about that. Anyone want to share an example?
So I'm directing a new center at the health department. It's for the Center for Learning and Innovation. And I have a new training project manager, and we have the health department's going through quite a bit of transition right now, a lot of reorganization, and we're doing a change management training program. And so one of the new training project managers, she's requiring a lot of coaching. And I feel like there's good synergy there, but again, it's reinforcing like it requires a lot of time. Clearly there's a lot of skill, so we're beyond the bottom right-hand quadrant, we're kind of in the upper right-hand quadrant now. So I think it's the right match, but it's definitely more time.
Right. So you feel like you're matching what you're doing with what she needs.
I'd like for it to be a little bit more towards the empowered down to the depth. We're not there yet.
Right. Yeah. And some of that comes with time. I find sometimes when you have people you've worked with for a while, that cycle can be more quick than when you're just starting out a new relationship with somebody, because that building that trust and that sort of really getting them to be empowered to take on those responsibilities and for your comfort can take a little bit longer. Once you've been through the cycle, it can go a little faster. Do you have lessons?
Oh yeah, I have a PhD student who is, she'll have her, so she's a second year student, so she has to really decide on her dissertation name, so she has to meet with the committee in a couple months, and so that's kind of a stressful thing for her. But I have to, I guess I'm kind of in the coaching stage right now where I feel like I need to give her like a lot of input to solidify her aims, and there's the added complication of I moved my lab into place, and so there's kind of like this added degree of chaos, and resources aren't where they need to be, so it actually requires a considerable amount of time to get that done in.
Do many of you know what you're doing? Have many of you taken a Myers-Briggs or know what your Myers-Briggs type is? Yeah. So this is very interesting when you think about, I'll go back to the main box here, when you think about people who are more thinking-oriented versus more feeling-oriented, so third dichotomy in Myers-Briggs, because the more feeling-oriented people, their primary style is really around relationships and relationship building, so they can really get stuck up here, because this is what they love to do, and it feels so good, and we can chit-chat and do that. So, but they have a hard time going here because this is emotionally meeting a need for them, or it's part of the style that they prefer. Whereas people who tend to prefer thinking, a little more, just focused on getting the work done kind of thing, make the opposite mistake, and they tend to go from here to here without actually going up and doing the relationship building work. So depending on what your style is, I don't know if that helps, but in terms of mistakes that people make, in terms of where they get stuck in boxes or things they forget to do, the feeling preference people sometimes forget to teach people the job, and they just go straight into the relationship building, and that makes, this is your exit point, right? So if they can't do the job, that's your exit, that's the easiest exit point there for either getting somebody off the team or your team or what have you. And if you go through all the relationship building, it's just going to make it much more difficult at that point. So if you know what your style is, that might help a little bit in terms of looking for common mistakes that you might make.
What's the Myers-Briggs? I've heard of the Myers-Briggs thing. What is that mean?
Myers-Briggs is a personality type indicator, and so it looks at preferences. There's introversion, extroversion, sensing and intuition is around how you take in information. Thinking and feeling whether you like to check off boxes or not. That's what I like to think about. But we can, I'd be happy to do a Myers-Briggs training for anybody who's interested in it. Something that we offer at the center, but it usually takes about 4 hours. Yeah.
I think that that's something that when you were talking about leadership and like flexibility both the leader and the team, it's good to know like what the style of like what your employees type is and your type, and like there's a training at the health department where you do a work Myers-Briggs and then you imagine one of your employees and figure out their Myers-Briggs, and it tells you like the best ways to coach people and interact with them based on your style and their style.
Right.
And sometimes people have like not good, like there's some styles that work better with each other, and if you want to really be a good leader, you have to be able to flex your style.
Right.
And some people aren't really good at doing that.
Yeah. Well, the preferences are just that, they're preferences, and they don't tell you anything about how good you are at anything, so you can have strong preferences and be really bad at stuff, so. But, you know, I think there's lots of tools like that. There's Myers-Briggs. The other things, so when you're thinking about building your team, you've got to be thinking about what is the goal first of the team? Do I have the right skills? And those skills are going to be both actual tangible skills that people have, but it's also going to be the dynamic that you're putting together. I don't know if you've ever been on a team with like 5 introverts. It's like really hard to get stuff, to have group meetings, because everyone's just thinking and no one's talking, you know? But then if you have a group of 5 extroverts, everyone's talking and no one's listening. So you have these kind of awesome things. So if you're thinking about your team, you might want to think about, you know, there's lots of these things you can do with your own team members at relatively low cost to kind of bring that awareness. But it really starts with you. It really starts with awareness about your style, about what your goals are, about who the people are that you have or that you're working with, and then being able to adjust around that. And a lot of that's difficult, but it's just around practice. But I really like this one because it helps, at least for me and my own research team, it helps me think about, you know, what challenges do I have ahead, where do I have people, and remembering that there's some phases that actually really take a lot of your time, but that is really critical because you can't just throw people into delegating. You're not going to get the best performance out of that if you don't invest some of the time to make sure that they're really capable and confident in what they're doing, so that you can really be confident in that delegating piece of it. Does this make sense? Does anyone have any other thoughts or questions about this? Is this helpful? Okay. So I'm just going to wrap up really quick. And there's some questions up here you can do at a later time. But so when you're thinking about being a leader of a team, we have these 6 C's for guiding behavior. So the first, we talked a lot about this, is providing common context. So providing a similar view of the end game, the success, shared set of values, cultures, and expectations, giving people on the team a comprehensive view. Why is it we're here? What are we doing? What are our goals? And a chance to both give and receive feedback. So you can think about how you provide common context to the teams you're on and the things you might improve on. The next one is providing clear goals and processes that are linked to the context, that are understood by everybody, that are specific if not written, of shared interest to all, and systematic and tied to have reliable mechanisms for implementation. So you've got to have clear goals and processes. You can't be vague with the team, otherwise you sort of get a little bit of anarchy or chaos in there. So one thing to think about as a leader, are you better at context or goals? So this does tie a little bit to Myers-Briggs as well. Some people who are more intuitive are really good at the big picture and the vision, and being able to say that, but can help the team always drill down to those processes, and other people are really great on the process, but they kind of forget where they're going. So it's good to look at your team and think about, do you have a good mix of folks that can balance those 2 things that are so important. The third one is capability, so making sure skills are in place, attitudes are aligned, and those participating are willing to make an effort. Nothing will kill a team faster than that one person who's detracting and undermining and doing all those things that we know happen sometimes. Capability, again, I think that's a stumbling point because we want people to succeed and people want to succeed, and it's really hard to admit when people are not going to be there or that it's not a right fit. And I think that's one of the hardest things as managers and team leaders that we have to deal with, is actually making those decisions in my 16 years at UCSF, I found incredible workarounds to capability. When the capability is not there and the workarounds are just amazing of what we do to keep a person who's not capable, because we don't want to go through the HR process to lay them off. But it can cause enormous dysfunction because of that. And I'm sure it's the same everywhere, but I think that's one of the biggest challenges. Coaching is successful when you recognize gain, you focus on improvement, you're instructive, you balance reason and emotion, and it's informal and frequent. So you can think about what attributes you have to make a good coach and where you stumble. This is one everyone loves. Confrontation. So when things aren't going well, making sure that it's very specific to a goal, to a commitment or a behavior, not general to the person, but really about the impact that it's having on the work. Give people real data on their performance and the behavior and the impact it has on others. And don't speculate on your partner's motivation. So that just undermines the interaction that you have with them. So we all think we know why other people do what they do, but none of us actually have any idea why other people do what they do. So not to bring that to the conversation is really important. So again, each one of these you could do a whole course on, but to think about where you were good at confrontation and where you need work. And then finally, the consequences. So rewards vary in their effectiveness. We saw that on motivation. Some things motivate people greatly, other things don't. But sanctions sometimes are necessary, and consistency is essential. So not giving mixed messages to your team, where some people are feeling like they're getting greater rewards than others for the team who's helping them. So that's it. That's what I have. This wraps it up, getting it done. Know the person, set goals, develop a plan, use stretch experiences, raise the trust. Sounds really easy, doesn't it?
Yeah.
So you guys are all ready to go just rock the team management. Do you have any questions? Any thoughts?
Good question.
Do you have a resources to like developing a plan and just like worksheets or I don't know, anything like that that we can modify to adapt to our team that we're working within, or as we build our teams? Hiring people, having like evaluations that you introduce when you hire someone, so that that's your check-in before you graduate them to the coaching phase or anything like that.
Yeah, I think people do it really differently. It sort of depends on the style of manager. Like, I can't think of anything. I'll ask when back at the center if folks have anything. If I come across anything, I'll definitely send it to Johnson so he can send it out. I know we've developed a way to interview and integrate people that's actually quite extensive. That we interview with many different parts of the team, and make sure that our interviewees are both introverts and extroverts and at various levels in the organization, so we're kind of giving a 360 perspective on the person and how they relate to different people. But we don't make people take a Myers-Briggs before we hire them, or anything like that. But yeah, I think you just have to be really thoughtful about what it is you're looking for when you're doing that. When you're looking for somebody on the team. And frankly, when you're doing peer teams, it's not, you can't always go through all that. You just need a specific skill set. You need an epidemiologist on your team, or you need a whatever, and you're going to have a limited set that you can work with, where those personal relationships over time are going to be really important.
And something that you didn't talk about, which was just the evolution of people as they grow within your team. And Jonathan had asked about this kind of as a specific matter. People evolve and they have different desires, going to medical school or whatever. And so how do you as a leader foster that in terms of just the natural evolution of your own project and your growth?
That's a hard one, because the best people are the people you want to keep, and those are the people that are going to leave. Those are the ones that are going to go on, and the person that's been doing the same repetitive job for the last 20 years is probably really good at it, but it's probably not going to be the most dynamic person. So you just have to kind of know that your team is going to have a mix and get the best out of those rock stars when you have them, and maybe it'll come back to you later. I don't know. Well, yeah. I don't know what this is going to be. No, I don't. But, yeah, I mean, the way I see it is that those folks that I've mentored that have gone on to do really great things, they become my colleagues, you know, that you work with in the future. And so it just expands your capacity. It just doesn't expand your capacity in your lab that day. It's beyond that. So.
But I might also add that, you know, as a leader, I would say that if people recognize that you are fostering the growth of the people under you, and that they see those people advancing to go on and do great things, like that's going to bring more good people in. And yeah, you might have to go through that process with them again, but it's like, I don't know, being a good basketball coach, like all the good players go to handful of teams because they know that's where they're going to get the best training, and while they're there, they do great things. That's my opinion.
Yeah, no, I think that's a really great point. So I wish there was a magic pill, but it's not necessarily that easy. So.
Great. Well, this was
All right, sorry for the boring part at the end. I hope it was helpful in terms of thinking about all the you know, the normal cycles of team. Conflict is normal, obviously